Hello everyone, this is the second part of my recap of the HBO series Rome. Make sure to watch the first part on my channel. Be sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this. Enjoy. Lucius Vorenus and Titus Pullo wash ashore on a small quay, after their ship is lost at sea. Without water, food, or any sign of rescue, they are nearly resigned to their deaths, when Vorenus notices the corpses of their dead comrades floating. The two men fashion a raft using several bodies to float it, and paddle out to sea. In Julius Caesar's camp, Mark Antony and a small contingent of soldiers have arrived, but the majority of the 13th Legion has been lost at sea. Pompey's army has Caesar pinned down, and outnumbers his forces 3-1. Grimly, Caesar and Antony decide they have no choice but to make what will probably be their last stand from where they are. In Pompey's camp, his officers consider the war all but over. Pompey knows that they need only wait, and starvation and weariness will cause Caesar's troops to desert. However, as predicted by Caesar, the politicians in the camp, led by Cato the Younger, want a decisive victory and pressure Pompey to attack. Cato and Scipio urge Pompey to crush Caesar in a final battle, reminding him of his reputation as a war hero. Pompey eventually gives in and agrees to attack Caesar. In the ensuing battle, Caesar's forces inflict a devastating defeat on Pompey. Caesar, exhausted, staggers back into his tent and instructs Posca to send word of his victory to Rome, before collapsing. In Pompey's camp, Cato and Scipio resolve to retreat to Africa and continue the war from there, although Brutus wearily remarks that they are running out of continents to flee to. Sick of fighting and the constant retreats, Cicero and Brutus both declare their intentions to surrender to Caesar and beg for his mercy. "I'm not afraid to die," Cicero declares. "I'm tired, and I want to go home." After they have left, Pompey consults with Scipio and Cato, and the three decide not to travel together. While the latter make their way to Africa, Pompey makes his way with his wife and children to Amphipolis, posing as a traveling merchant. In Caesar's camp, Cicero and Brutus are welcomed back with open arms by an ebullient Caesar. Befuddled, they remind him they are enemy combatants, but he will have none of it. "We are old friends, who have merely quarreled." He invites them to share the table with the rest of his staff, who are busy celebrating the victory. Caesar is also overjoyed by their news that Pompey has survived Pharsalus, though disheartened to learn his old friend turned bitter enemy has no intention of surrendering. When they reach the coast, Pompey's children come across Vorenus and Pullo washed ashore. Pullo and Vorenus recognize Pompey, though they conceal it. Pompey's party takes them in and gives them shelter and food. Out of Pompey's earshot, the leader of his escort tries to recruit Vorenus and Pullo to help overpower Pompey's guards and take the family prisoner, promising a share of the rich reward Caesar will no doubt offer. Pullo is all for the suggestion, but Vorenus rejects it as dishonorable. The guide tries to ambush Vorenus, and Vorenus stabs him through the throat, alerting Pompey. Vorenus informs Pompey that he and his family are now officially prisoners of the 13th Legion. In private, Pompey admits to Vorenus who he is. He tells an interested Vorenus how he was defeated at Pharsalus, then tearfully pleads that his family be allowed to make their way to freedom. Taking pity on the old man, Vorenus lets his party go, over Pullo's objections. Pullo and Vorenus make their way back to Caesar's camp. Caesar is furious that Vorenus let Pompey go, but surprises Antony by letting Vorenus off with only a reprimand. When Antony argues Vorenus should be executed for such an error, Caesar explains that he believes Vorenus and Pullo are being protected by powerful gods, having recovered his missing eagle in Gaul, stumbled upon a wagon full of treasury gold, survived a shipwreck that drowned the rest of their legion, and then found Pompey on a beach. He will not kill men with such powerful friends. In Rome, at Attia's urging and Servilia's invitation, Octavia has continued to visit Servilia's house. At first, Octavia is the supplicant, begging on her mother's behalf for help in keeping their house safe when the news of Caesar's defeat reaches Rome. But their positions are abruptly reversed when the news arrives that Caesar has triumphed, and Brutus's whereabouts are unknown. Servilia collapses with tears. Octavia comforts her, and then kisses her. The two women are later shown lying in bed together. Pompey's party makes its way from Amphipolis to Alexandria in Egypt, confident of a warm welcome from the reigning king, Ptolemy XIII. While Cornelia and his children watch from their boat, Pompey is rowed ashore, where he is greeted by an ex-comrade from Spain, Lucius Septimius, now serving as a mercenary in the Egyptian army. Pompey reaches out to shake Septimius's hand, but Septimius seizes his arm and stabs him in the chest, sadly stating he is acting under orders. While Cornelia shields the children's eyes, she watches in horror as Septimius beheads Pompey and lets his corpse topple into the water. In Rome, Marcus Junius Brutus arrives home, and is somewhat put out to receive only a perfunctory welcome from his mother, Servilia, after his long absence. Caesar and his legion arrives in Alexandria in pursuit of Pompey, who unbeknown to him has already been betrayed and murdered while seeking refuge there. Caesar is greeted by the ministers of the young king Ptolemy XIII, led by Ptolemy's regent, the eunuch Pothinus, and his tutor Theodotus. They are dismissive of the dispute over the throne between Ptolemy and his sister/wife, Cleopatra VII, assuring Caesar there will be no disruption to the Roman grain supply. In private, Posca informs Caesar that the Egyptians are lying, and that the situation is very unstable. Caesar is also clearly irked by the petulant young king. Hoping to win Caesar's support in their dynastic dispute, Ptolemy presents him with Pompey's head, but Caesar is outraged that a consul of Rome has been quartered like some low thief. As recompense for this insult, he demands that Pompey's killer be turned over to him, and the debt owed to Rome by the king's late father be repaid in full, although the Egyptians state that the 17,000 drachma will be impossible to pay. Caesar decides to remain in Egypt to arbitrate between the various factions, ordering Mark Antony to return to Rome, despite Antony's and Posca's warnings that he will be left with dangerously few men in Egypt, surrounded by hostile factions that could make him into a common enemy, and that Cato the Younger and Scipio are still at large and likely gathering fresh forces. Vorenus and Pullo are dispatched to the south of the country to find Cleopatra and escort her to Alexandria. Meanwhile, Pothinus and Theodotus persuade Ptolemy to anticipate Caesar's decision by having his sister killed, while she is still under house arrest. They also decide to temporarily placate Caesar by delivering Pompey's assassin, Septimius, asking him to deliver a message to Caesar, in person, which turns out to be his own death warrant. A short time later, Septimius's head is placed on a stake outside the palace. Vorenus and Pullo wait for Ptolemy's assassins to appear, to guide them to Cleopatra's exact location. When the assassins arrive, the Romans ambush them just as they are about to kill Cleopatra. As her litter travels to Alexandria, Cleopatra confides in her servant, Charmian, that it is imperative that she seduce Caesar. "If I cannot, then I am dead." She notes that, if she could bear him a son, something his 3 wives have not done, her position would be much more secure. She also notes that it will be several more days before they reach Alexandria, but now is the perfect time for her to become pregnant, as her womb is between the flood. To this end, she orders Charmian to invite Vorenus into her tent and orders him to have sex with her. Though tempted, Vorenus refuses and storms out of the tent, instead ordering Pullo to report immediately to Princess Cleopatra and do as she says. Confused, Pullo reports for duty, but when he learns what his task is to be, he performs it with gusto. Afterwards, Vorenus warns him never to speak of it, as Caesar will likely have him killed if he finds out. Vorenus and Pullo smuggle Cleopatra into Alexandria concealed in a sack. The moment she reveals herself, Caesar is immediately smitten with her. She enters the throne room, where her younger brother quails before her. Sweetly, she tells him she does not blame him, but that he has been manipulated by his evil advisors and swiftly demands their deaths. Shortly thereafter, Pothinus and Theodotus's heads join Septimius's on the stakes outside the palace. Angered by this sign of Roman imperialism, a mob begins gathering outside the palace, and Vorenus orders his men to bar the gates and prepare for combat. Cleopatra swiftly seduces Caesar into making an alliance, sealed by enticing him to have sex with her. Scenes of Cleopatra and Caesar making love are interspersed with scenes of Servilia and Octavia in bed, and scenes of the mob laying siege to the palace. Almost a year later, in Rome, Cicero meets Brutus in the Senate house. Cicero says that, if Caesar is defeated in Alexandria, then they should do everything possible to keep Antony from assuming power after him. Brutus reminds him that they swore loyalty to Caesar when they surrendered, but Cicero parries that their oath does not extend to Antony, and suggests sending word to Cato and Scipio, who have raised a new army in Numidia. Antony then enters, telling Cicero that he's heard rumors of Cicero's planned treachery, and warns him that, if he ever hears of it again, he will cut off Cicero's soft, pink hands and nail them to the Senate door. As he is leaving, Antony adds that he came with good news: Caesar is victorious in Alexandria. In Alexandria, we see Ptolemy floating face down in the river, dead. Caesar presents Cleopatra's infant son Caesarion to his soldiers. As the legion cheers, Vorenus glowers at Pullo, who pauses for a moment, knowing that there's a distinct possibility that the child is his, then goes on cheering proudly. On the dusty plains of Africa, a defeated Cato and Scipio drag themselves to the nearest town, only a handful of soldiers and slaves in their wake. Despite gathering an army with the king of Numidia, they were overtaken by Caesar and his legions in a final battle at Thapsus, and now they must consider their fates. Cato urges Scipio to consider making peace with Caesar. "You have a tolerant spirit," he tells him, before disappearing into another room to take his own life. Scipio soon follows his lead, instructing his aide Aquinas to cut his throat. When word of the final battle makes it back to Rome, a newsreader pronounces that the last standard of the bastard Pompeian scum is fallen, and Rome is at peace. Caesar, Mark Antony and their triumphant legions soon return to a hero's welcome. After 2 years at war, Vorenus rushes back to Niobe and his children, Pullo in tow. His wife has found a lucrative new vocation in his absence, teaming with her sister Lit to run Evander's butcher shop. She asks her husband to consider joining them. Pullo, at a loss as to where to go or what to do next, turns his attentions to his rescued slave, Irene. Octavian also has returned to Rome after 2 years at the academy, much to the glee of Attia, who throws a dinner to celebrate the homecoming, and more importantly, Caesar's triumphant return. Determined not to appear weak, Servilia insists on attending with Brutus, though she's still furious about her son's new loyalties. Common sense demands I cannot ask mercy of Caesar, and accept rank and favor from him, then refuse his friendship. Brutus tells his mother, "I am not proud of myself, in lieu of a noble suicide, you shall have to be content with that." For her part, Servilia insists her objections to Caesar are strictly political, denying she has any lingering sorrow or rage over his lost affections. Yet throughout the dinner, she steals glances at the man who spurned her, as he avoids meeting her eyes. Octavia watches Servilia intensely, oblivious to her own brother's attentions. The chain of longing is interrupted when Caesar asks Octavian how he would go about fixing the Republic, and upon hearing his thoughtful reply, appoints the young man to a seat at the pontiff's table, despite protests from the chief augur. Octavian begs off at first, insisting he would rather focus on his poetry, but Caesar insists. Servilia becomes preoccupied with uncovering the truth about Caesar's secret affliction, in the hopes of using it to destroy him. She enlists her young lover to get the truth from her brother, going so far as to suggest she seduce him. A young man will tell his lover anything. This sends a disgusted Octavia to the door, as a desperate Servilia reveals her own secret: she witnessed one of Attia's men killing Octavia's husband. To their dismay, Vorenus and Pullo find themselves lugging carcasses at the butcher's shop, taking orders from Lyd. When the shopkeeper next door is threatened by 2 gangsters, Vorenus intervenes, earning a death threat of his own. Later he learns that the men work for Erastes Fulman, the merchant he invited to his first feast as a civilian, and now the most powerful crook in Rome. He kills whomever he wants, Niobe informs her husband. Erastes arrives at Vorenus's door the next day with a mob of thugs, several ferocious dogs, and an ultimatum: Vorenus must meet him in the Forum the following day to apologize, and kiss his feet in public. If he does not show, his wife and children will be raped and killed, followed by himself. Niobe prepares the kids for a trip to their cousins, and the possibility of life without their parents. Vorenus and Pullo prepare their weapons, and stand ready at the first sound of commotion. Instead of Erastes and his men, however, they are greeted by several uniformed officers announcing the arrival of Gaius Julius Caesar, imperator of the Gallic legions. When Erastes and his men finally make their way to the neighborhood, they see Caesar's high-ranking officers standing guard outside Vorenus's villa, and quickly retreat. The general has come to ask Vorenus to stand for magistrate on his slate. Vorenus stares straight ahead in shock before boldly declining the offer. "Sir, respectfully, your politics are not mine. I'll not speak against my belief. I am not tyrant," Caesar responds forcefully. "I have legally taken dictator's powers. I will return those powers to the people and Senate as soon as I am able. No man loves our republic more than I. I will not rest until it is as it was in the Golden Age." After silent pleading from his wife, Vorenus eventually accepts, and Caesar leads him outside his villa, and presents him to a crowd of cheering onlookers. In the commotion that ensues, Pullo finds himself further adrift, consoling himself with jugs of wine. Lost in a drunken stupor, he tells Irene about his slave parents. "I'll cut my fucking heart out of my chest and eat it before I kneel to anybody." Octavia, reeling from the news that her mother killed her husband, turns all her loyalty towards Servilia, and decides to seduce her younger brother. But when she attempts to get the truth about Caesar, Octavian calls her bluff, and forces his sister to confront her conscience. With this, Octavia breaks down. Adding to her regret, their encounter was witnessed by their mother's slave, Merula, and soon Attia is after both of them with a whip. When Octavia confronts her mother about her husband's murder, Attia swears on the spirits of my ancestors and the stone of Jupiter that she had nothing to do with it. "You abased yourself for a stupid lodge." She wastes no time punishing the informant. As Servilia's litter travels through the city streets the following day, Her guards and servants are ambushed by several of Timon's men, the same men who killed Octavia's husband. When the litter falls to the ground, Servilia herself is attacked, a veiled Merula chopping off her long red hair as several men pull off her dress and whip her body with a stick. They leave the noble woman naked down to her hips in a heap on the street. As Timon looks on at the sad spectacle, his expression turns to grief. As the Senate gathers to sanction Caesar as dictator, Cicero and Brutus put honor aside and stand and support the man they once fought, urging their fellow senators to follow them. He has shown himself to be as wise and merciful in victory as he was invincible in battle, says Brutus. Let this be an end to division and civil strife. After a unanimous vote in his favor, Caesar declares the war over and announces 5 days of feasts and games honoring his triumph. In the working-class neighborhood of Aventine, days before municipal elections are to be held, a nervous Vorenus makes his first campaign speech, Niobe standing demurely by his side as Posca coaches him from the wings. The dark times are behind us, he says to a mostly indifferent crowd, forcing a politician's smile. Caesar has put an end to patrician tyranny and will ensure that the voice of the common people be heard. With this statement a crowd begins to gather. But when a heckler denounces the rhetoric of CAC, an angered Vorenus suddenly seems to embrace his own words. I wouldn't be standing here on Caesar's slate if I didn't believe, if I didn't know, that Caesar has only the Republic's best interests at heart. Posca also dispatches a number of nearby thugs to drag the heckler off. Without further interruptions, Vorenus soon has the crowd hanging on his every word. Attia pays a visit to a fragile Servilia, who appears catatonic since her brutal attack. She declines Attia's invitation to sit with her family during the celebrations, her steely reserve still intact. She changes the subject to Octavia. She is staying at a cousin's villa, Attia gloats, mooning over some young fool of a poet. In fact, Octavia has taken a self-imposed exile at the temple of Cybele, where she prays fervently each day and cuts herself with a knife, an offering to the Great Mother. When her brother comes to take her home, her running away reflects badly on the family, he tells her. She steadfastly refuses. I want to be cleansed of my weakness and filth. I want to be reborn as a pure servant of the Great Mother. After catching a glimpse of her sliced arms, Octavian takes her by force with help from the temple eunuchs. No longer an enlisted soldier, Pullo becomes enraged when he's told he cannot march with the 13th Legion in the celebrations. He heads to the only home he has, the darkened drinking taverns, where a drunken Quintus, son of Pompey, is denouncing Caesar to anyone who will listen. When Quintus staggers his way to Brutus' villa to berate him for taking Caesar's mercy, he instead finds a kindred spirit in Servilia. To prepare for the elaborate pageantry, Caesar is anointed by Octavian, who paints his uncle's face red with ox blood. For his first ceremony, the new master of Rome presides over the public execution of his former adversary, Vercingetorix, the king of the Gauls, who has been kept alive, just barely, in the dungeons of the city since the end of the Gallic Wars. When Vorenus learns that the elections are rigged, he is running against straw men, he reconsiders the deal he has struck. The people are not crying out for clean elections, Posca tries to assure him. They're crying out for stability and peace. They're crying out for jobs and food and clean water. You can do great things for your people. Pullo, with nothing left to lose, makes an appeal to Vorenus to free Irene. He plans to marry her and start a family in the country. I love her, I've never been so sure of anything in my life. When Irene gets the news, she's overjoyed, throwing her arms around her savior and kissing him. Moments later, Niobe's slave Oedipus emerges to thank Pullo himself. We had thought to take the Vorenus name as our own when we became freedmen, but Irene says it must be under your name that she becomes my wife, so I hope you'll agree. Barely grasping this news, Pullo flies into a jealous rage, pummeling the young boy against a column until he is lifeless. With this act, Vorenus reaches the end of his rope with his friend. You do this violence before my children? As Irene shrieks and wails over her dead lover, words between Vorenus and Pullo escalate. You're a damned fool. The disrespect. The stupidity. I'm a candidate for magistrate, I can't have killings in my yard. Pullo's retort cuts Vorenus to the bone. And here you are, with your nice clean white toga, stays clean no matter how deep you wade in filth. Time was, you said Caesar was a rebel and a traitor. Now today, he tosses you a little coin in some farmland, and he's savior of the Republic. Lost for words in his own defense, Vorenus tries to fight him, but Pullo refuses. Furious and clearly distressed, Vorenus tells Pullo to leave and never come back. Across town, Brutus learns that his mother and Quintus have been distributing pamphlets in his name, a defense of Republican principles against the forces of tyranny. When he tells his mother he might be killed for her act, she does not seem entirely opposed to the idea. You are looking to your own comfort. I am looking to history, she tells her son, before suggesting he do what his father would have done, run Caesar out of Rome. However, Brutus won't have any part of her insanity. Instead he goes to Caesar to set the record straight. Having adopted a more imperious tone since his anointment, Caesar tells Brutus he believes him, though he still seems suspicious. "I wonder who it was wrote this," he intones. Brutus shakes his head. "I wish I knew." Lost in drunken oblivion, Pullo takes refuge in the taverns again, too poor to even encourage the prostitutes. He is approached by Erastes Fullman, who offers him a job. "I'm a soldier, not a murderer," Pullo responds, barely alert. In times like these, Pullo, is there really any difference? The crime lord responds, and tells Pullo to come find him when he's sobered up. Pullo appears to mull his offer before passing out. In the woods outside Rome, the body of Vercingetorix, rescued from a trash heap in the city, burns atop a bonfire. Dozens of Gauls have gathered for a clandestine ceremony to pay reverence to their fallen chieftain. Bereft of options, Pullo has taken up mortality work for Erastes Fullman, descending into the underworld as a knife-wielding hitman, spending his pay on prostitutes and a growing appetite for opium. Across town, his erstwhile partner assumes his official duties as a magistrate, receiving local citizens to hear out their complaints and requests. One such request comes from Macius, an old comrade from the battlefields, who speaks on behalf of fellow veterans. Less fortunate than Vorenus, they cannot live solely on the money Caesar has given them, and they want land in Italy. Already weary from taking on the burdens of the poor, Vorenus is dismissive, but he takes their demand to Caesar. "Is it possible they turn on me?" Caesar asks his new representative. "They'd never fight against you," Vorenus assures him. "But if they're not satisfied, those that have no other skills to employ will turn to banditry and raiding." Caesar decides to offer them rugged land near Germania, and if Macius refuses it, Vorenus is to make him a personal offer, in the hopes that he will sway his fellow veterans to accept the bargain. Brutus is disturbed to find graffiti depicting him with a knife at Caesar's back. As he orders a servant to erase the image, Cassius arrives to tell him not to bother, the drawings are everywhere. Plebeians painted the graffiti in the hopes that Brutus would rescue them from the tyrant, Cassius tells him, ushering in liberty as his ancestors did before him. "They would not pluck a hair for liberty," Brutus sneers contemptuously. "Plebs love to see their betters fight. It's cheaper than theater and the blood is real." When Cassius calls him a coward, Brutus bristles with anger. He is not blind to what Caesar has become, he insists, but he has pledged his friendship to the man. "He trusts me. I cannot betray that trust. For friendship, you would let the Republic die," Cassius says with disgust. "I am just a man." Brutus pleads. "The life or death of the Republic is not in my hands." "The Republic is in your hands," Cassius snaps back. "The people will not accept a tyrant's death unless a Brutus holds the knife." Erupting in fury at the position he's been put in, Brutus slaps the man and stalks off. When Pullo murders a man in broad daylight, the brutality is witnessed by an old weaver, who chases him through the streets. Screams of "murderer" echo through the alleyways, sending Pullo into a hallucinogenic collapse, and ultimately to jail. As predicted, Macius refuses Caesar's land offer for the veterans, and Vorenus makes him a personal offer. When he steadfastly refuses, "I have been true to my brothers since I first spilt blood, my honor is not for sale so cheap." Vorenus employs the same logic that was used on him, convincing the man he would not be helping his fellow soldiers by declining the offer. Macius negotiates a higher price for himself and accepts the deal, as the two men turn away from each other, ashamed of their compromises. At a symposium hosted by Adia, she pulls Caesar aside to warn him about Brutus. She believes that Servilia will not rest until Caesar is dead. Her imperious uncle scoffs at her warnings. "I well imagine poor Servilia is not very fond of me, but really, wants me dead? You are a dramatist, Adia." Vorenus and a terrified Niobe arrive at Adia's symposium as Caesar's special guests, and awkwardly attempt to mingle with the haughty guests. Niobe has made herself an elaborate dress for the occasion, which earns Adia's disingenuous compliments. When Octavian learns that Pullo is awaiting trial for murder, he makes a plea to Caesar to intervene. "We must do nothing," Caesar insists firmly. The man Pullo killed has been a vocal critic of his leadership, and intervening on his behalf would look suspicious. Octavian secretly enlists Timon to find Pullo and advocatus, but there are no takers among the idle lawyers in town. Only when Timon holds up a hefty purse does one come forward, a skittish, underfed young man. Pullo appears resigned to his fate, however, and refuses to help the man find sympathy for his plight. At a trial held before a jeering crowd in the Forum, The prosecutor makes a simple case against Pullo. A good man was hacked to death by a wretched specimen, a horror that's becoming too commonplace. I'll not take your time with lengthy proof of his guilt. Look at him. It's not open to question. We all know he's guilty. As Vorenus makes his way into the crowd, he comes upon Macius, who is hiding a sword. He spots several other soldiers in the crowd disguised as civilians, all ready to pounce should their fellow legionary be sentenced to death. Terrified of the political consequences, Vorenus insists Macius call off their planned attack for the good of the Republic. Caesar cannot reinstate law and order if soldiers are allowed to kill citizens without consequence. Pullo's nervous lawyer offers a weak case for his defense, and when he cannot deny his client's guilt, Pullo is condemned to death. When Caesar tells Brutus he wants him to govern Macedonia, he sees it as his ousting, a way to remove him from Rome. Caesar finally admits he's uncertain whether he can trust his son, given his past betrayal, but Brutus insists he betrayed nothing. Had you told me you were to march on Rome, and asked for my allegiance, I would have given it. I would have judged you insane. But I would have given you my allegiance. Because I look on you as my father, but you did not ask for my allegiance. You demanded it at sword point. Caesar takes back his accusation. But Brutus still insists he will not go to Macedonia. When Caesar invokes his legal authority, Brutus is near tears. As my father I looked on you, he says. Be reasonable, Caesar replies. You are on every wall with a knife at my throat. It would be foolish to ignore it. Only tyrants need fear tyrant killers, Brutus says through clenched jaw. And you are no tyrant. Haven't you told me so many times? The morning before he is to be led to his death, Pullo makes an offering to the gods, a cockroach he's grabbed from his dungeon cell. He pleads that Irene will know that he's sorry for what he did, and asks them to give her a long and happy life. And same for my friend Lucius Vorenus and his family, if that's not too much. At the arena, before a capacity crowd, Pullo is led into a small ring, where he's greeted by 3 giant gladiators and handed a large sword. He drops the sword on the ground and sits in the center of the ring, refusing to fight. I just want to die, all right? The men won't have it, and taunt him with insults. But only when they deride the 13th Legion does Pullo's fire return, and on impulse he lashes out at them, knocking out one before slicing through another. The crowd starts to root for him as he cuts down gladiator after gladiator, but finally, after he has been wounded so many times he can barely stand, a large carnifex enters and knocks the sword out of Pullo's tired hand with a skull-topped mace. Just as the carnifex is about to deal the death blow, however, Vorenus emerges from the crowd, picks up a weapon, yells 13, and takes on the gladiator, slicing his leg in half and collapsing him to the ground, before killing him with his own weapon. As the crowd recovers from shock, a roar of approval rises up, and Vorenus helps his old comrade out of the ring. Across town, Pasca walks stealthily through the back alleys, a fat purse of coins in hand. He enters a dark tavern and drops the leather satchel on a table. If we implore you again, best not use veterans, he tells the man seated by the purse, Erastes. He nods in agreement. In the wake of their escapade in the arena, Vorenus and Pullo have become heroes to the plebeians of Rome. Pullo, recovering from his injuries in an Avernum hospital, is thrilled to learn that plays, murals and other tributes to himself and Vorenus are all over the city. When one man comments that there isn't a lady who wouldn't open her doors for the mighty Titus Pullo, he escapes from the hospital, steals a horse and heads for Rome to take advantage of his newfound fame. At the same time, Vorenus and his family have gone out with the priests of Saturn to inspect and bless the new farmland that Caesar has given him. In private, Vorenus expresses to Niobe a worry that Caesar could exile him from Rome, or worse. Upon their return home, Vorenus learns of Pullo's escape. His old friend is inside, having been found unconscious by the Appian Gate. Vorenus dismisses Pullo's desire to enjoy their fame, commenting that even if he survives his injuries, Caesar will likely have them both thrown back in the arena. Vorenus explains he has a meeting with Caesar the following day to discuss what happened. That same night, Irene, who has not forgiven Pullo for killing her lover, sneaks into his room and tries to kill him, only to find herself unable to. Niobe stops her before she can recover, stating everyone would know it was her. Once he has recovered sufficiently, Pullo goes out into Rome, looking to enjoy himself. However, upon returning with an eager companion, he glances at Irene and relents. Shortly afterwards, Pullo goes to the shrine of Rusina to gain a measure of forgiveness. Irene follows him. At the Senate the next day, Caesar discusses his plans for Rome with Mark Antony and Cicero. Cicero is most perturbed about Caesar's plans to allow Gauls and Celts into the Roman Senate. Their meeting is interrupted by the arrival of Vorenus. Caesar is furious. Vorenus disobeyed his order not to interfere with the execution, but remarks he cannot harm the pair without angering the people. Since he cannot simply ignore the deed, he decides he must reward Vorenus by making him a senator, astounding all present. Cicero is up in arms at the suggestion, but Caesar remarks that he wishes for the Senate to be made up of the best men in Italy, not just the richest old men in Rome. In private, Antony and Pasca remark that Caesar's plans will make him a lot of enemies, but Caesar refuses their suggestion to double his guard. When they question this, Caesar replies that with the great hero Lucius Vorenus at his side, none will dare raise a hand against him. That night, Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, has a nightmare of a flock of crows flying in the shape of a skull. She fears it is an omen, but Caesar dismisses it, remarking he has suffered similar dreams for years and no longer feels any need to fear them, and disregards Calpurnia's suggestion to leave Rome, insisting he has too much work to do. At the Senate the next day, Brutus and Cassius, along with Cicero and Senators Casca and Cimber, disgustedly watches the Gallic and Celtic additions to the Senate enter with Caesar. At Servilia's house that evening, they remark they must act soon before, in their view, Caesar destroys the Republic, but Casca and Cimber fear the fact that they will likely have to slay Vorenus along with Caesar. Servilia counsels the group against harming Vorenus, since killing a hero of the people will likely turn them against the conspirators. Casca and Cimber, along with Quintus Pompey, propose simply poisoning Caesar or killing him in his bed, but Brutus angrily yells that their intention is an honorable act and must be done honorably. However, none of the group can answer the question Quintus poses them with, how? However, that night, Servilia remembers that she has heard of Lucius Vorenus before, from Octavia, and tells Brutus they can use this information to remove the threat of Vorenus. On the Ides of March, Servilia sends Attia a letter, seeking to meet and reaffirm their friendship. Attia is surprised by this, but accepts, taking Octavian with her. At the same time, Servilia's slave approaches Vorenus and tells him of Niobes's infidelity with her sister's husband and the fact that child Lucius is her son, not grandson. Furious, Vorenus storms off from the forum as Caesar enters the Senate and returns to his house, where he angrily threatens Niobe and demands the truth. When she tells him, Vorenus reaches for a knife, but Niobe hurls herself from a balcony to her death before he can react to either attack or save her. In the Senate, while Quintus and a number of other senators delay Pasca and Antony, the conspirators make their move. Cimber, under the pretense of asking Caesar to recall his brother's exile, signals the attack and he, Casca, Cassius and a number of other senators surround and attack Caesar, stabbing him from all directions in a frenzy. Horrified at the sight, Brutus can only watch as the man he once considered a great friend is torn apart by the mob, dropping his blade in disgust. As the mortally wounded Caesar collapses, Cassius hands Brutus a knife and tells him to finish Caesar off. As the pair stare at each other, horrified at what they have come to, Brutus stabs Caesar to the heart, putting him out of his misery, then collapses from shock. Mark Antony enters just after Caesar has died. Realizing he is surrounded by enemies, Antony hatefully stares at Brutus for a moment, and then flees. Brutus sinks down weeping, distraught at what he has done. At the same time, Servilia gleefully reveals what has happened to Attia and Octavian, and promises Attia that she will hurt her as slowly and painfully as she did to Servilia, then allows them to depart. Attia is dumbfounded by what has happened, but Octavian coldly glares at Servilia, contemplating what is to be done next. In the midst of all the sorrow and death, the episode ends on something of a happy note, as at the shrine of Rusina, Irene forgives Pullo for his past transgressions, and the pair walk off hand in hand.